By 1994, Democrats had control of the Florida House, but Republicans finally won control of the Florida Senate. That wouldn't be all Republicans would win that decade, and the scope of the governor's power in Florida would begin to change significantly. In Part 5 of Red, Purple, and Blue, A Sea Change in Florida Politics, we look at the Jeb Bush years and the beginning of large changes in Florida's highest office. By 1997, Democratic Governor Lawton Chiles had to work with a fully Republican legislature. It wasn't just the legislature that was Republican, though. More and more Republicans were getting into offices across Florida under Florida's then Republican chairman Tom Slade.
And he was the guy that set out to run Republican candidates, not all at the top, but for mosquito control district, for soil and water conservation board, for county commission, for school board, for city council.
Despite Democrat Bill Clinton being president in the 1990s,
Republicans were winning races at the state level.
Bush would run for governor again in 1998 against Lawton Chiles' Lieutenant Governor Buddy McKay. McKay may have worked side by side with Chiles, but he did not connect with voters as Chiles did. Jeb Bush won easily by 11 points and carried all but 6 counties. He won his home county of Miami-Dade. He was the first of more than 25 consecutive years of Republicans being elected Florida governor.
I was in college, so again, I have never voted for a Democratic governor.
But Bush wasn't just the first Republican governor in a string of them.
He was really the impetus and the backbone to get things moving forward for the Republican Party.
He did things that didn't put Democrats as on guard, because it was just like little things here and there to move the needle. Obviously, some of the more important things was the seismic shift in how we deal with our higher ed system.
Education was one of Governor Jeb Bush's biggest priorities. His A-plus plan for education was the state's first voucher program. When he came into office, student performance in Florida declined in the previous decade. Bush then sold a voucher plan to Floridians in 1999 as healthy competition and a way for poor and working-class parents to take children out of bad schools. Florida GOP Chief Tom Slade and his successor insisted on party discipline, so they would not derail their agenda now that Republicans finally had control of the Florida government. Democrats, meanwhile, were facing similar problems to when then-Governor Graham left the governor's mansion.
Republicans had a 10 to 20-year plan and strategy, and the Democrats were so used to winning our state as a consistent basis and thought that Jeb was an outlier.
Florida had voted Republican in the presidential election from 1980 through 1992. But Jeb Bush's brother, George W. Bush's win in Florida in 2000 was arguably more significant. 2000 was the first time Florida voted for a Republican president, a Republican governor, a Republican congressional majority, a Republican cabinet, and significant majorities in both houses of the state legislature.
And unfortunately, the Democratic Party back in the latter part of the 90s and early part of the 2000s didn't do anything to shift.
Democrats Bob Graham and Bill Nelson were U.S. senators in Congress representing Florida, yes. But on state matters, Democrats now had little voice.
What was also happening at that time, Bush's win and then subsequent redistrictings after that, really changed the makeup of the Florida legislature. That in some ways, even though we were a purple state for a couple of decades, Tallahassee became, as red as my shirt because of the way some of those districts were drawn.
Between that and Jeb Bush's easy re-election win in 2002, you saw more power being handed to the governor's office.
Once you're in a state that is comfortably one party, suddenly your ability and your preferences for giving power to a governor where you're pretty confident you're going to be the party in charge going forward changes. That then enables the governors to do a lot. And Bush started this, right? Bush centralized some authority in the governor's mansion, more so than had been in the past, particularly if you look at education and what was done there.
Bush appointed secretaries of education, members of the State Board of Education, and had firm control of educational reform. Governor Bush is also associated with hurricanes. In 2004, he was front and center dealing with preparation and cleanup for Hurricanes Francis, Jean, Ivan, and the infamous Category 4 Charlie.
Phenomenal support for the citizens that were in need.
With Hurricane Charlie devastating Charlotte County, Jeb Bush would flip the coin that year in the Port Charlotte versus Charlotte High School football game, wearing a shirt that read, divided by a river, united by a storm. And being an election year, his brother was front and center as well, President George W. Bush, who was running for re-election. He would win Florida that year by 5 points, which was a big margin for Florida standards. Jeb Bush got high marks and the governor was riding high. The question now was who would take over his position after the 2006 election. His successor, elected in 2006, was popular with Republicans, at least at first, but that changed dramatically by the end of his successor's first term. In Part 6 of Red, Purple, and Blue, A Sea Change in Florida Politics, we'll look at the Charlie Crist years, how the power of Florida's governor's office changed, and the heard round the world. Be sure to catch Red, Purple, and Blue, A Sea Change in Florida Politics every Sunday at 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. on SNN. You can watch all episodes on our website by hovering over News on the top of the page and clicking on Politics.